Hello, friends. In part 2 of this unit, we are going to focus on two major events in the first half of the 20th century, World War I and the Great Depression. Both of these events shaped our country as well as Virginia. We have two learning targets for today. I can explain America's involvement in World War I, and I can describe the effects of the Great Depression on American life. While it's easy to pinpoint reasons for the occurrence of World War II, it is much harder to understand how the Great War, later known as World War I, came to be. It all started in Europe, which has been settled for centuries before North America was ever colonized. During that time, empires rose and fell, borders changed, and eventually the countries we have come to know were formed. However, in the early 1900s, there was still a lot of changing in power. European countries and empires formed alliances to protect each other, and ultimately it was those alliances that led to the First World War. In 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was assassinated by a Serbian national. These countries declared war on each other, and their allies came with them. Within a week, Austria-Hungary, Germany, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire were at war with Serbia, Great Britain, France, Italy, Japan, and Russia. For now, this was a solely European war, thousands of miles away from the United States. Speaking of the United States, our president at the time was Woodrow Wilson. He was our 28th president and began his first term before the outbreak of World War I. He and Congress took a position of neutrality when the war began. After all, this didn't involve the U.S. In fact, Wilson narrowly won re-election based on a campaign that promised the U.S. wouldn't get involved in the war. The U.S., however, did supply the Allied powers with weapons and other supplies from the beginning due to its relationship with Great Britain. Unfortunately, the U.S. was unable to remain neutral. Germany was trying to blockade Britain, which meant stopping shipments of war supplies from coming into the country. In order to achieve this, they began a campaign of unrestricted submarine warfare on any ships into the country. As a result, Germany bombed passenger ships as well, and many Americans were being killed. In 1917, President Wilson went before Congress asking them to declare war on Germany and its allies. Congress agreed, and the U.S. officially joined the war, making it a truly global war. The U.S. sent millions of troops, and the added manpower ultimately helped to end the war. In the end, the U.S., Great Britain, France, and their allies won the war. Although Wilson wasn't able to keep America out of the war, he was able to help end it. And afterwards, his goal was to create something that would help prevent future wars. His plan was called the League of Nations, and its purpose was to provide a gathering place for nations to meet and resolve their differences. The League of Nations was incorporated into the Treaty of Versailles, which officially ended the war, but Wilson was unable to convince Congress to ratify it in the U.S., so the U.S. was never a member. Ultimately, it wouldn't help avoid another global war 20 years later. For years, the technological innovation and growth, as well as the increased production of supplies for the war effort, helped to build up the economy. People had jobs, extra money, and the average American could afford to invest in the stock market with the hope of making additional money. Banks were also allowing customers huge amounts of credit, which was great in the short term, but ultimately put many Americans into a lot of debt. At the end of the war, production of war supplies wasn't necessary and the economy slowed. Then the stock market crashed and people lost all of the money they had invested. For some, this was most of their life savings. Then they began pulling their money out of the banks, but the banks ran out of money and even more lost all of their money when banks closed. As production slowed due to decreased demand for products, people were laid off from their jobs. From 1929 to 1939, millions were without jobs. Many families relied on soup kitchens just to be able to feed their families. President Hoover didn't do much to help the people. Instead, he bailed out the banks in hopes that they would then lend money to businesses. He didn't believe in directly intervening in the economy. Droughts in the Midwest also caused problems farming, and overall this time period was terrible for most Americans. After Hoover's inability to help America's economy recover, President Roosevelt was elected, and he helped to turn everything around. His plan, the New Deal, created jobs and helped to directly assist citizens who were struggling financially. He also saw the creation of the FDIC, which insured people's money when deposited into banks, so that no matter what happens, people's money would be safe. He also helped to develop the SEC to regulate the stock market to prevent another major crash. Thanks to Roosevelt and his administration, the U.S. was eventually able to recover. Let's take a moment to reflect on today's lesson. Why did the United States get involved in World War I? What was life like during the Great Depression? How did President Roosevelt help America recover? Hopefully, you are able to answer these 3 important questions. Have a great day.